Hey, I am from around here. Before I begin my story, do any of you know my Uncle Buck and my Aunt Gertie? Take it down a little. No? Good, because I did not change the names to protect the guilty. My Uncle Buck and my Aunt Gertie, they live just up the way a little bit. That's good. And one night, they're sound asleep in their bed when suddenly my Uncle Buck is awoken by somebody calling his name. So he jumps up and he runs over and he looks out the window. And there standing on the front lawn is the prettiest gal he has ever seen. Now, if you do run into my Aunt Gertie, please don't mention the prettiest part, okay? That just upset her. Anyways, he sees this pretty gal standing down there, and she's a motioning to him to come on down. Now, I gotta tell you, my uncle is about 2 dimes short of a nickel, especially when it comes to beautiful women. So he ran right downstairs in his bare feet and his Bigfoot pajamas. When he gets out there on the front lawn in the moonlight, he notices that this beautiful woman is wearing boots with spurs on the back, and she's got a bridle in her hand. But he looks around and he doesn't see a horse anywhere. Now, while he's pondering this, she raises that bridle up over his head and she begins to circle. Ragwort, Tansley, parsley, pea, change to a donkey just for me. And the next thing you know, my Uncle Buck is gray, standing there on all fours with a big long tail and big floppy ears. Yeah, and before he can even say hee-haw, she slaps that bridle on his mouth, she jumps up on his back, and she digs in those spurs. Now, I probably should tell you right about now that my Uncle Buck is used to my Aunt Gertie being on his back every day, but this was way worse. Yeah, some of you men know what I'm talking about. When she dug in those spurs, he lit out like a house on fire, and it wasn't no easy ride neither. No, they were going up and down mountains and across a creek and through a briar patch. Let me tell you, they were hauling donkey. Yeah, it's a kids' festival, right? Well, they rode for quite a while, and eventually they come to a clearing. And out walked 12 little men, probably about 3 feet tall. And each one of them was dragging a big bag of gold, just about as big as they were. And that witchy woman, she got down, and them little men, they started to load that gold up onto my Uncle Buck's back. And I'm going to tell you, since last time he went to Burger King and got a Big Mac and some fries, that's the most weight he's carried in a long time. Well, they took him through the clearing with that gold till they come to a cave. And they stowed that gold inside that cave. And then that witchy woman climbed back up on my Uncle Buck's back, and they rode like a house fire back to the front yard. And she pulled that bridle off his face, raised it up over his head, and she said, Ragwort, Tansley, parsley, pea, back to a human you will be. And he opened up his eyes, and she was gone. Well, he dragged himself upstairs, and he went to bed. And in the morning when he woke up, he was all covered with scratches, and his muscles were all sore from running all night. Well, he went ahead and he told my Aunt Gertie about it. And she says, oh my gosh, Buck, hogwash, you was just a dreamin'. And he says, yeah, well then how do you explain all these scratches all over me? She said, sleepwalking. Now, I gotta tell you that later on, my Aunt Gertie confided in me that my Uncle Buck was always a little bit of a jack donkey. And so really, he'd just kind of gotten his comeuppance, if you know what I mean. Well, the problem was, it happened the next night, and it happened 5 more nights after that. And some of you are probably sitting out there wondering, why in the world would my Uncle Buck keep going downstairs? Well, like I say, he's 2 nuts short of a fruitcake. And, well, that's a little disconcerting because I'm told it runs in the family. Anyways, my Aunt Gertie, she tried to help. She even tied him to the bedpost once, and it just kept on happening. So one morning, my Uncle Buck's exhausted. He's just sitting around the house, and he's mulling over this thing, and he starts to think he ought to get that gold for himself. Like he could go back in the morning and find it. And so he formulated a plan, which for my Uncle Buck was no easy task, I got to tell you. And that night, he went up to his bed, he laid down and went to sleep, and he waited for that witchy woman to call his name. And sure enough, she did. And before you know it, he was tearing through the woods just like every other night. Only this time, he set his plan in motion. You see, every couple yards, he'd stop, and he'd raise that big donkey tail of his, and he'd leave a little donkey dookie on that trail just to mark it. Yep, obviously, somebody had been reading Hansel and Gretel, and knowing my Uncle Buck probably more than once. So the next morning, he'd be able to follow that trail back to that cave and get that gold. Well, the little men, they loaded him up with some gold when he got to the clearing, and then they took him through the forest and back to the cave. Only this time, they tied him up to a very small oak tree. It was just a little sapling, probably not any bigger around than, I don't know, maybe bigger around as a woman's ankle. Now, my Uncle Buck, he was just a grinning away. And you know how donkeys, when they grin, they got them big old chomping teeth. And that gave my Uncle Buck another idea, which 2 in 1 week like this was crazy, right? He got to thinking that he could mark that spot extra well with them big old teeth on that little sapling. So he leaned down and he started a chomping and a gnawing and a chomping and a gnawing on that little tree. And the next thing you know, he heard my Aunt Gertie calling his name. Yeah. And then he felt it whack right upside the head. And that is when he woke up. And there he was on the bed on all fours, gnawing on Aunt Gertie's ankle. Yeah, but you see, that wasn't the worst of it. No. You see, he turned around and looked, and what with all that marking of the trail, he'd made a terrible mess on those bed sheets. Thank you very much.